Welcome to Mixunderstood, where we talk about identity, the meaning of the word race, and explore the multicultural and multiracial experience through personal stories, candid conversations, and expert insights. I'm Hannah Lee. Thank you for being here today. Today, we're wrapping up Season 2. This is sort of the season finale epilogue, if you will, where I'll be sharing some of my reflections and aha moments from Season 2. And I want to apologize for this taking so long to come out. I'm so sorry. It was a combination of me being completely burnt out, resistance from I guess you could call it personal growth and process that I'm going through doing this podcast, and also procrastination and probably a few other things in there. But please accept my apology, and I will find a way to make it up to you down the road. So before we get into all of my vulnerable thoughts and revelations, I wanted to say thank you. Thank you to everyone who has participated in this very special season that we've had, Season 2. I want to thank all of our guests. I want to thank you, our listeners. I want to thank my family and my friends who've supported me. And I want to thank Matthias, my wonderful husband, who's also created the music for this podcast and some really fun new transitions for Season 2. And he's just been my rock and my support through all of this. And he was the one, too, who was like, why haven't you released the epilogue yet? What's wrong with you? And I said, I don't know. And he just kind of gave me a shaking and he was like, do it. You got to do it this week. So thank Matthias for that as well. So that kind of leads me into sharing some of my aha moments from this season. So where do we begin? I guess I want to take us back to the episode that I had with Punita Khanna, and something about that interview and then the conversation that we had after the interview sort of triggered a lot of things inside of me. So just to give you guys some context again, one of the things that came up at the beginning of the interview with Punita Khanna when we were doing the 3 facts about her, and one of the facts was she mentioned that she had had breast cancer and that she never told her son, who happened to be the guest on the previous episode, Rahul. And in kind of the moment of connecting and being present with her, I felt compelled to share my personal story of my father actually passing away from cancer and him not telling us that he was sick. And that's something that I've been really struggling for the past few years since my father died, accepting that fact that he hid it from us and didn't give us the opportunity to be there for him. And I'm bringing this up because a few things happened with that coming up in the interview with Punita. The first thing that happened was it was actually very healing for me to speak with her about this. She's the first person that I've spoken to about this that was someone who had been on the other side, another person who had hid it from their kid, and her sort of telling me that it's actually very common. And I think a part of me knew that, but just hearing it from her, I believed it suddenly. And it kind of unlocked something in me and really recognizing and accepting that there was definitely a cultural component to my father's decision. There was also a personality component and a generational component and many other things, but definitely a cultural component as well. And I'm going to tie it now to the other pieces, the other moving pieces of the puzzle. At the end of our interview, when Punita and I were just chit-chatting, And she got to look behind the curtain of making this podcast, and she saw how much work and effort I put into it. She asked me, why do you do it? Why are you doing this podcast? And initially I was a little bit thrown off because I kind of thought that the answer was obvious. I'm mixed. I have a mixed background. I'm interested in the topic. I've had all these experiences. I'm passionate about it. It seemed like a rhetorical question to me initially. But after she left, I kind of sat in that question. And I think, again, because of that moment that we shared around my father, it was just enough things to kind of tip me over the edge and have my aha moment. Suddenly, I realized, now this may have been very obvious to you as the listeners, but to me it wasn't. But suddenly I realized, my father's been coming up quite a bit in this season, and he's come up quite a bit in the podcast as a whole. And suddenly I realized that actually his passing was the deeper why as to why I think I started this podcast. So I don't know, this may not sound like a big realization to you, but to me it really was. And I think going back to when we got the news of my father's passing, and it was so sudden, and in the same breath to discover that he had died from cancer and we didn't know, and in the same breath that, he was in Japan and we were in Israel, and there wouldn't be enough time for us to travel to go to his funeral, which was being held the next day. It was one of those situations which I think a lot of people that are in an intercultural family, it's like everything came to a head. The reality of being mixed was a really tough pill to swallow that day. The logistics of having a father that's from a country far away, and that we're having Christmas in a different country, and he passed away in a country that I don't speak the language, and I don't know the customs around death there. And all of these things started to come up, and they were very, very difficult for me to handle amidst the insane amount of grief that I was facing for the first time in my life, anything on that level, really. And what happened next was I completely crumbled, and I remember feeling like the person I thought I was had died with my father, and I couldn't quite understand why that was happening. I felt like I was thrown into some parallel universe where everything looked the same, but I wasn't the same. And I had to somehow learn to navigate this new universe, knowing that there was this whole other life and self of me before. And I didn't have the words or the ability to articulate this back then, but I have been reflecting on it over the past few months. And I think what happened is that I felt like I completely lost my coordinates in this world now that my father was gone. And part of it, a big part of it, was because a big chunk of my identity, a chunk that I hadn't really fully explored or claimed up until that point, was suddenly gone. And that part was linked to my father, and he was kind of like the bridge between me and my Japanese heritage. And growing up in Israel, like, there were very few Japanese people around us, and I didn't have a relationship or a friendship with them, really. Like, every now and then, maybe my dad would go have lunch with some other Japanese person that was in Israel, but there was no one Japanese who was an active participant in my life growing up in Israel. So my father was the only Japanese person that was a significant part of my life. And so he, therefore, was kind of the only link that I relied on to kind of say that I was Japanese. And then when he passed, it was like, well, am I Japanese anymore? He's gone. And I never claimed my Japanese side because I just kind of leaned on him for that. I never learned Japanese. I never actively pursued things around the Japanese culture. It was a little bit just default, some of the things we had in the house and the few times I had been to Japan, but that was it. And so I suddenly was thrown into this identity crisis in the midst of my grief. And coming back now to where I started around this aha moment, after I started coming out of like the really, really heavy fog of grief, I had a dream. Some of you may know this already, but I had a dream that I started a podcast and it was about, being mixed. And, I called Amy the next morning and I told her about it and she was like, let's do it. And she was so excited and passionate like me. And we just jumped on board and it was very cathartic for the both of us because we just felt like, we talk about these things a lot anyway between her and I, but now we're sharing it with the world and we're gonna bring to light other mixed stories. And it was just a very exciting time. But I think I was unconscious of the fact that I was actually desperately, desperately reaching my arms out and trying to grasp for my heritage, for my father, for my connection to, I don't know, my ancestors, a sense of like needing so desperately to feel rooted, to feel grounded in something. And it took me 2 seasons to realize that that's kind of where this all came from. The podcast was the first creative thing that I did, that I took the initiative to do after my father's passing. And it was a really big deal because there were a few months there where I was so just completely checked out that I honestly thought I was never gonna laugh again. I was never gonna do anything fun again in life. I thought everything was over as I knew it. And so it was really incredible to start this podcast and to have these conversations and to go back and like look at my childhood and look at my teen years and look at the circumstances of how I was raised. And it was all just like this kind of coming back to self that I so desperately needed while I felt so adrift in the world in this way, in this new way, And so we were saying thank yous earlier, and I want to say another thank you. Thank you to this podcast. It's become sort of a thing of its own, but it was like this vessel that was able to provide me a structure and like a safety net and a space for me to reclaim my identity and also claim my identity in ways I had never before. This is kind of leading me now into how this podcast and this season in particular has impacted me and changed me as a person. I think one of the biggest things has been that I'm finding like the ability to articulate more the experience of being mixed. And sometimes I don't have the words, and then the guests that have come on have said and shared things, and then I'm able to use their words later when I go out into the world. So it's been very empowering for me to have these conversations and start to build a language around this experience. For so many years, it was just like, it is what it is, and I can't explain it. And, I can share a look with another mixed person and they get it. But it's like now there's this whole language around it, and we have more terms and awareness. And yeah, and so that's one part. Another part has been that I've been a little bit more, and again, with the help of the podcast, it's kind of given me the excuse to be proactive about doing things that are connecting me to, particularly at this point, my Japanese heritage. And this season, I ended up doing an educational series on social media with mixed Asian media. And it was called Fusion Friday. And every week, myself or Alex, we would break down a term that relates to being multiracial or multicultural. And I learned a bunch of things, and that was very empowering to sit down and do the research and then get out there and share it with other people and then have conversations with people in the comments. Through the Mixunderstood social media page, I discovered Japan Screen Advocacy and went to that event where I met Emmy and Phil and a bunch of other Japanese people or people that have a connection to Japan. And, I would have never gone to an event like that. Even I would say a year and a half ago before I started this podcast, I would have never thought that I belonged in that space. So, because I felt like, well, I'm not really Japanese, so nobody's going to really want me to go to this Japanese event, right? I'm going to be an outsider there, and I don't speak the language and all these things. But through the process of this podcast and building this community, I really am starting to kind of feel more comfortable in walking into those spaces. And I even signed up to this, you know how they have those Instagram ads, and of course an ad popped up to learn Japanese, and I clicked on it and I signed up. And to be honest, I've deleted it already, but Mommy, who was in the first episode of season 2, she actually today, I was telling her about it, and she sent me a few Instagram accounts that help you learn Japanese. Speaking of, this is just a side note, but Mommy had kind of a transformational experience after our conversation, and she's moving to Japan next year in 2025 in the springtime. So it's just a few months away to really have that opportunity to immerse herself in her Japanese culture for the first time and really like live there and see how that goes. So she's been immersing herself in watching a lot more Japanese TV series and stuff. And she told me there are a few of these accounts to follow. And so I've mentioned before that I was toying with the idea of maybe learning Japanese, and now it's kind of on the table again, which is exciting. So let's see if this seed will grow into a tree. So, it's been really fulfilling to have these conversations and connect with all of the guests and with you, the listeners. And it's not like I have all the answers now. It's actually different. It's like I have more questions. But I love that, living in the question and being curious and compelled to dig deeper and discover more. And so that being said, I feel like we really only scratched the surface with this season. There were so many other episodes and topics we could have dove into that a part of me wishes we had, but at the same time, I literally don't think I had the capacity to do more than what I did. And as this grows and as hopefully I build a team of helpers, I'll be able to produce more episodes. But I'm proud of what we accomplished, and I want you to know that I am aware that there's a lot more to explore and that I will do my best to continue to do that in the next season. And I feel like the next season I kind of feel called at the moment. It might change, but I feel called to sort of go into more of like the inner world and the psychology of being mixed. Speaking of grief, like, looking into that and looking into coping mechanisms, depression, racial imposter syndrome, internalized racism, all of these things of how we kind of navigate life and work with what's happening inside and mental health. I'm also curious about like stories around the ever-changing identity. So like the phases of identifying as one thing for one chapter in your life and then that shifting down the road, or even stories of people who were raised a certain way, thinking that they had a certain heritage and then discovering later that actually there's something else and it was kept secret from them. And how do you come to terms with that? So there's a lot of stuff that I am thinking about for season 3. So I really hope that you will join me then. I am going to take this holiday season off, and then I will start kind of putting feelers out, doing research, getting together a new list of guests. So on that note, if you have anyone that you think would be a good fit for the next season or someone that I should meet, I'm open to it. So send me an email, introduce me. I think you can feel it, but we're coming to the end of this epilogue. And I just wanted to share one more thing. 33 is the number of this episode. And 33 was a really special, important, significant number to my father. And he just saw it as like a sign that he was in God's perfect will when the number 33 would pop up. And he used to drive us crazy. Every time he saw 33, 33, 33, he would make a big deal out of it. And when I saw that we were getting kind of ready to get to the end of the season, I was like, 33. And then that connected with a conversation I had with Punita, and it just all felt like, you know what? This is what it's meant to be. So I want to dedicate this season and this episode to my father, and to anyone who's ever had a complicated relationship with a parent, particularly their father. And here's to us continuing to grow, deepen our understanding, and learn about ourselves, our culture, and our ever-evolving identities. I want to share one tiny anecdote about my father. We had plenty of miscommunications, a lot of them cultural miscommunications, and I didn't understand why he wanted to do things a certain way and vice versa. And I remember when I left home and I moved to New York, and I was starting to be changed by American culture. And one day we happened to be on the phone, and I was trying to give my father an update about what I was doing in New York and my life, and I was dancing, and it was very exciting and all these things. And I was telling him something, and I said, you know what I mean? And my father interrupted me, and he was like, why you say you know what I mean? I know what you mean. And I was like, okay, Abba, I get it. I know that you know what I mean, but it's just like a thing that people say here in the States, okay? And I can't help but not say it. You know what I mean? Why you say you know what I mean? I know what you mean. I know. I didn't mean to say that again. I just, you know what I mean? Why you say, it completely... Suddenly I found myself in an argument with my dad over this stupid thing. You know what I mean? I was young. I was starting to speak like some of the people I was meeting in the States, and my father thought it was ridiculous. And I don't know why. Every time I think back on that conversation, I laugh. So this season we talked about intercultural relationships and family dynamics. And so I think as hard as it was for me to kind of share some of these parts of the puzzle with you, I think it's still relevant to our season's theme. And like I said, so much more to be explored in season 3. And I hope you will be there with me. And And again, I am available at mixunderstoodpod@gmail.com. I still have the number if you want to leave a message. It's 323-524-8662. And I hope that you have a balanced, healing, joyful, and surprising rest of 2024. Surprising in a good way. The world seems like it's gone mad lately, but let's keep connecting and doing the things we love. On that note, I'm going to say bye-bye. Thank you again. Bye. This episode was produced by me, music by Matthias Kunzli.